have it at 7:15. We will now call this meeting to order. I'll ask our county administrator, Mr. Meadows, if you will lead us in invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance, sir.
Yes, if you're able, please rise for a moment of silence, and then I'll lead us in the pledge. Let us pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
All right, first up, presentation, recognitions, and awards. And I know that we have Mr. David Clark from Virginia Department of Transportation.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Got a little bit of a lot of things. I won't say everything, but we've got a lot of various things we've been working on in this kind of end of the summer, early fall, before we have to get ready for some serious winter weather. And that's probably one of the first things I want to mention is that we did get all of our equipment ready. We call that a dry run for winter weather, and we do it every year. Bring all the equipment in. Our guys work on the equipment, put the spreaders on, the plows on, get everything ready to roll as if we were going to have a real storm here soon. And then we have a crew from our district equipment office come and actually grade them on all the things. So the guys take a lot of pride in doing that, and there's a little bit of a competition among the areas on whose equipment is in the best shape after this thing. So that went on, and we're all set to go. We're just waiting on that weather. In the meantime, we're also getting some of our last mowing done for the year, still doing some, obviously, gravel roads, and even had some dust issues. Got ready for a hurricane that might have come here, but it didn't quite, so that was actually pretty good for us. And we've started the brush cutting crew. We put together several crews, and it's made the rounds to the 4 counties that are in the Christiansburg residency, and we did get some brush cutting done on, I think they did some on Keister's Branch and Long Shop, as well as Catawba Road, but they'll be in the county for a while. And worked on that section of Route 11, Radford Road, that was where the shoulder had gotten undermined, and we had to mill out a lot of that and had it down to 1 lane for a while. Also just sort of, some ditching and some shoulder work here and there. And that's all I have as far as the stuff we've done. Like I said, it's just a little bit of everything and then getting ready for winter. So,
Thank you, sir. We'll go around the room to see if any supervisors have any questions or comments. We'll start off with Supervisor Fidzikowski.
I don't really have any questions for you tonight, David, but I am looking forward to those brush cutters coming down and hitting the secondaries in my district, because they're kind of low-hanging fruit there for all the traffic coming through. So
yeah, they did get some shoulder work done on Mount Pleasant Road. I forgot to mention that.
Oh, okay.
And there are on Route 11, the other end of Route 11, Route 11 north of Christiansburg, doing some ditching work right now.
yeah, that definitely needed it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor King.
Just have one thing. We've been in talks with VDOT about the deer signs out on Radford Road.
Okay.
From Silver Lake down to, I think it's 1820 Radford Road. And last year, I know y'all said you didn't have many signs left. Have y'all come up with any of them?
I know we had some. I'll check and see. I know we put some up in Pulaski last month, but I'll check on that. Yeah, maybe the Montgomery request got misplaced.
Oh my goodness!
But it was on Radford on Route 11.
Yeah, okay. It's right there, right past Silver Lake, and then down to 1820. There was 2 there, and both of them got knocked down by
They were the
wrecks.
previous ones. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll get those back. Yeah.
Thank you. That's all.
Supervisor DeMott.
I don't have any questions. Thanks for being here tonight, though.
Thank you.
Supervisor Bone.
Thanks, David. Got a great report from Catawba Road. Must have done a really great job. I don't get out there towards McDonald's Mill too often. So 2-3 weeks ago, Nelly's Cave Road, there was a truck off the side, took out one of your big arrows
Okay.
coming up the hill. And then the only other thing is, I drive by the sharp turns by the bug shop on Harding Road, and I don't want to say it's going to wash away the corner, the sharp turn. But what you guys did for Janelle Road, the reinforcement that you did, I don't know if that would be useful in that corner because it just drops right off. From
All right, yeah, I'll take a look at that. So-
That's all I have. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Supervisor Shepherd.
I've been on this board, this is my 7th year, and I think shortly after I got on the board, I started requesting brush be cut in various places. And I've had multiple complaints over the years of people wanting brush cut because of their campers or whatever it was, motor homes. And probably more this year than I have in the past. And I'm getting up to something here. And I really appreciate the work that the guys did. They've done a great job. It looks wonderful, and it's really helped. There was one place on Long Shop Road, I drive a school bus, and I had to get in the opposite lane to go around the curve, and everybody knows that's a bad thing to do.
Right.
And now I don't, so I appreciate that. But that's leading up to, I had a call this evening from a young lady complaining that she felt like you guys cut too much. So I think she had some trees in a pasture that was right beside the road, and I'm sure they were probably in the right of way, and I kind of tried to explain that to her, but I told her I would bring that up to you.
Okay, well, I'll take a look at that, and it happens. Sometimes we mow places where people have stuff that they
Well, I
would
looked
rather
at
not
it
mowed.
after she
And
said that, and it didn't look, I mean, it's obvious they cut some limbs, but
yeah,
I mean,
and that's not a, it's not a precision piece of machinery. When it cuts stuff,
It
it
works
cuts
good.
a lot, and just give it a few months and it'll heal itself back up, and hopefully not look so bad.
yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Biggs.
I don't have any questions, so just keep the roundabout on Price's Fork on the radar.
I'm still working with our traffic engineering.
Yeah, thank you.
They say the signs there are the regular, are the ones that are there on all of them, but I'll keep telling them that this might need special attention
Yeah,
rather than the other ones. Yeah.
because of the circumstance.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark, talking about the speed study, again, thank you for that. When can we expect the speed limit change signs to go up at Route 114 from Price's Fork to Vickers Switch?
I don't have a date for that, a specific date yet. It's all been approved. The sign layout has been designed. Right now, it's a matter of our workforce. The guys that do the signs for our primary roads come out of Salem. They're doing a lot of this type of work. They're also trying to get as much line painting done as they can. It's the same group. Line painting is very weather dependent, not only temperature, but humidity, moisture, dew point, rain, stuff like that. So they have to get as much done as they can. As soon as they can get to the sign installation, they will. And I also would like to, because that's going to be kind of a big change. A lot of people travel that road. We're going to put message boards up several days in advance, just warning that this is going to happen. So it won't be, wake up one morning and boom, there are the signs. They may be up, they may be covered, or if we know exactly when they're going to put them up, we'll put up a message board.
Very good. And again, that will change from a 55 zone to a 45 zone for that area.
Yes.
Right, very good. Do we have any follow-up questions?
I do. I have one
Supervisor
thing I want
Shepherd?
to ask. While they're down there cutting brush, are they going to do lick run and mash run? Because I've had a couple calls about that too in the last week.
I'll double check. Lick run and mash run?
Yeah.
I know them well.
No, lick run and Norris run.
Norris run, okay.
They did mash run, I think, this morning.
Okay. Norris run.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe not all of Norris run, but they'll get
Yeah.
some of that.
That's all.
Anyone else? Mr. Clark, as always, thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Okay, up next, we have several public hearings scheduled tonight. Let me go over the guidelines for public hearing, and then I will call each public hearing. Each individual, we have a sign-up sheet, so I'll call if there are any names on the sign-up sheet first, and then anyone that hasn't signed up is welcome to come forward. You will have 4 minutes to speak for the public hearing. You will need to say your name and address. All comments must be directed to the chair and other supervisors from the speaker's lectern at the front of the room. Speakers may leave any written statements or comments to the supervisors with the board clerk. Speakers would be judged out of order should the speaker engage in personal attacks, use of profanity, or abusive language and debate for the audience and not address the supervisors. So this is for the public hearing. The first public hearing we have will be the FY 22-23 budget amendment. I do not have anyone signed up for that public hearing, but you are welcome to come forward, state your name and address, and you have 4 minutes to speak on that topic. Seeing no one come forward, we will close that public hearing. The next public hearing is an ordinance amending Chapter 10 entitled Zoning, Section 10-48 and 10-61, mini warehouses. And I have Ms. Bree Hopkins coming up here. Thank you, Bree.
Thank you. So as you stated, we have a zoning text amendment to the outdoor storage mini warehouse facilities. We are seeing an increased need for mini warehouses across the county. A lot of that is due to the increased number of students at Tech. A lot of it's due to people needing places to put things because they just don't have room at their house. People getting elderly and needing places to store so they can move in with family. Many different things. The other thing that we've noticed an increase is the need for some outdoor storage. Things like recreational vehicles, boats, trailers, cars. The main reason for this is we have a lot of subdivisions that the homeowners associations do not allow those items to be stored on the property, and that occurs a lot within the towns. So the zoning ordinance currently has no way to deal with that use. We do have a definition for the mini warehouses, but it does not allow for any of the outdoor storage. In addition to that, while we were looking into that, we realized that we have no supplemental regulations like we have for a lot of our special uses. So what that means is when we have a special use permit come forward, we tend to add conditions to those permits. We're having to add the same conditions over and over and over again. Sometimes you'll get wording that's changed a little bit, and then there's question, well, why did we change it? So we were looking at a way to make that more standardized when we do those special use permits and they come forward. So we looked at other jurisdictions to see how they handled everything, and we did come up with some proposed changes. Let me get this on slideshow here. Our existing definition, you can see that there. It's just a structure consisting of individual enclosed small self-contained units. It does not include anything for outdoor storage. It is only permitted by special use permits, so we do not allow these by right in any of our zoning districts. They are only allowed by special use permit. So we have proposed to modify the definition to add the underlined section there that states outdoor storage areas are allowed as an accessory use and shall be used for the storage of motor vehicles, trailers, and recreational vehicles only. So we would limit that to just the vehicles and the trailers. It would not, you could not put inoperable vehicles there. So everything in the storage would need to be up to date with tags and licensing. We also are proposing to add some new supplemental regulations. These are those standard conditions that you tend to see on the special use permits when they come forward. The first one is regarding lighting and fencing. So the owner shall provide security by means of security fencing with a gated access, dark sky friendly security lighting no higher than 15 feet, and security cameras maintained in good working order. The second, the owner shall post readily visible contact information, including but not limited to name and phone number on site for the appropriate personnel to be reached in case of emergency. Buildings shall be spaced a minimum of 30 feet apart. This is mainly to allow 2 trucks to get in there if they're unloading or loading things, but it's also to allow emergency services to have good access and leave those drive aisles open. No door opening for any storage unit shall be constructed facing any residentially zoned property. All outdoor storage areas shall be screened from adjoining properties by a Type 4 buffer as outlined in the landscaping section of our ordinance. And then the following uses shall be prohibited: auctions by tenants, commercial wholesale or retail sales, or miscellaneous or garage sales. This does not include auctions that are held by the facility owner. So if they have someone that has failed to pay the rent on their storage unit and they auction off the contents, that's not what this is prohibiting. This is prohibiting, I have a storage unit and I'm using it to run an auction warehouse out of. The servicing, repair, or fabrication of motor vehicles, boats, trailers, lawnmowers, appliances, or other similar equipment. The operation of power tools, spray painting equipment, table saws, lathes, compressors, welding equipment, kilns, or similar equipment. And the storage of flammable, highly combustible, explosive, or other hazardous materials. So those are standard conditions that we put on most of the special use permits for these that come through. The Planning Commission did take a look at this last month, and they recommended unanimously to approve the ordinance amendment. Public notice has been given through the Roanoke Times for both the Planning Commission public hearing and the Board of Supervisors public hearing. We did not have any speakers before the Planning Commission. So with that, I will take any questions you have from me.
Thank you, Bree. We'll start off with Supervisor DeMont.
Thank you, Bree. I really
welcome.
appreciate the presentation. One question, and I feel like the answer might be obvious. Boats or jet skis, are they allowed, not allowed, not typically stored in that fashion?
They are allowed. So they would be part of the recreational vehicles
Okay.
that would be allowed. It's not just for RV campers.
I was thinking just campers. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct. It would include boats and jet skis as well.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Supervisor Bone.
Going back to the security cameras, is there a requirement for the recordings to be saved for a certain period of time?
We do not have that requirement, no, and generally have not in the past.
And does cameras can be operable, but it doesn't mean that they're recording.
Right. Yeah, I see where you're going with that. Yes, we don't require that they save the recordings. I think by requiring that they be functional, it means that they would at least be recording. I don't know how we would determine how long they would need to keep those.
I would ask the sheriff's department maybe if they want a certain length of time, but it wouldn't hold up a vote for me.
Right.
Okay, Supervisor Shepherd.
I don't have any questions. I just had an idea, I thought about Ms. Bone's question. I would say some of those people don't go to those to know that anything had been stolen for 3 or 4 months, maybe 6 months. So I don't know how you would regulate that. But anyway, that's all I have.
Supervisor Fizikowski.
I didn't hear anything in there that would say that the trailers or vehicles or whatever would be stored in a certain location on the lot. Because you mentioned the distance between buildings is 30 feet. What would prevent them from parking the recreational vehicle in between buildings?
I think that would be something that we would regulate when we go through the special use permit process. So just because we do the ordinance amendment doesn't mean we don't have any regulation over it from there. That's definitely a condition that we could add to the supplemental regulations to say, storage of all vehicles shall be either inside or in a separate area. But we didn't put a specific area because that could change based on the site.
I wouldn't think that would be normal business procedure, but if they did get full up, maybe tempted to
I can see you just
park them in
pull a boat
between.
in and drop
Yeah.
it.
And that could create problems, especially for emergency vehicles like fire trucks and what have you that have to
Correct.
go through. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Supervisor King.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Biggs.
I have no questions. Thanks for your information.
Bree, thank you for the presentation. I too have no questions. We will now open it up for the public. I do not have anyone signed up to speak on this public hearing, but if you'd like to speak on this issue, please come forward. You'll have 4 minutes. State your name and address. Seeing no one come forward, we will close this public hearing. Next public hearing, special use permit, 9DG LLC, the Travel Center. It's my understanding that the applicant has requested remove this from the public hearing in order to revise the special use permit application.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's correct. After we advertised, the applicant submitted a substantial change to his plan. And so because of that substantial change, it needed to be re-advertised. What I would suggest is if anyone's here who wants to, I'd open the public hearing if anyone wants to speak. We should let them, there'll be no presentation, but it'll come back to the board in another public hearing in a few weeks after the Planning Commission revisits the project.
Okay, so this is a request for a special use permit to allow a travel center. I do not have anyone sign up to speak on this issue, but if you'd like to come forward, you have 4 minutes if you'll state your name and address. Seeing no one come forward, we will close this public hearing. The next public hearing, proposed ordinance to abolish the merchant's capital tax. I do have a list. I will go through the names on the list, and then after the list is completed, if anyone else would like to come forward, they will have that opportunity as well. First person on the list, if you'll come forward, Mr. David Duncan.
Thank you. David Duncan, 2185 Plank Drive, Blacksburg. I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, Board of Supervisors. As I was putting together some thoughts as far as perspective on this ordinance, ran across an interesting stat. According to the National Automobile Dealers Association, dealers pay an estimated $22 billion in taxes nationwide. These automotive retailers are proud of their communities they serve and the brands they represent. These local merchants are your neighbors, your fellow church members, and they promote the communities they serve in. In the case of the Montgomery County Merchants Capital Tax, these same local merchants have contributed more than their fair share to the tax base here in Montgomery County, Virginia. This tax statute for merchants capital was written at a time where consumer shopping habits and choices were very much different. This particular tax code's been on the books quite a while. And in the current state of retail, we're seeing more of a move of an Amazon-like type of model. Pick up and delivery, picking up for this, for that, shipping and things of that nature. So with the change in these consumer habits, it leads us to a point, I would argue, that the merchant's capital tax has kind of reached the end of its shelf life. So this tax statute is hard to implement. I know it's hard to enforce as far as from a local government standpoint. So I just wanted to kind of bring your attention that I believe it's time to phase out this merchant capital tax. And I want to thank all of y'all for the time and what y'all do for the county. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up, Chris Waltz. And I failed to mention that when the green light comes on, that's when your 4 minutes begin, and when the yellow light flashes, that's your 1 minute warning.
Chris Waltz, 1370 Rigby Street. Last time when I spoke about this, I told you examples, because they're saying that it's voluntary. No more voluntary than other things like, doing things to your house and not telling the county so your taxes don't go up. You have businesses or people running businesses out of their home through Facebook, that don't get business licenses. So they're unfair because it's voluntary. Let's get rid of those. Property taxes. People remodel their houses and don't tell the county. So their taxes don't go up. Well, then that's unfair. Let's get rid of those. I think they need some relief. I do. I agree with them on that. But this idea of twisting yourselves into pretzels to try and go, well, it's just unfair. It's ridiculous on y'all's part. It doesn't look good. Give them some relief. You gave me 30% relief on my personal property taxes, which, as far as car dealerships go and NADA, they took advantage of the pandemic and the chip shortage. Because now my 2015 is worth more today than it was when I bought it in 2019. That was car dealerships. That was the NADA that did that to us. They artificially inflated the prices of vehicles. And we paid for it last time on personal property taxes. So give them some relief. I agree. But to eliminate it and twist yourselves into pretzels to try and come up with a reason for whatever reason. And I'd also like to point out, the four that are at the top, they all offer online stuff. They all do. One of them is an online-only retailer, and that was one of the arguments, was, well, online retailers, it's unfair for brick and mortars. The number one in the county is an online-only retailer. And the rest of them all have internet components to them. Be it Walmart, Sheeler, Dunkin'. You know, y'all should look at, and what are you going to do to come up with the rest? You're saying, well, property taxes are going to go up because we're reevaluating them. Yeah, well, last time when you reevaluated, you counted 3 sheds that hadn't been on the property in 10 years. And I actually had to fight that. You don't do a very good at reevaluating that either. So let's get rid of property taxes. You know, I said they need some relief. I'm sure they do. I shop at their stores. Ed Bridge, I stop at his store. Stacy Martin, I shop at his store. My wife loves his wife's clothing store. They need some relief, but they don't need to get off scot-free because they use the same fire, the same police. If a Dodge Viper is stolen from Sheeler, he doesn't investigate it, he calls the police. They use the same roads. And you could actually argue that their cars on the roads tear up more than my one car driving down Roanoke Street every other day to go to work. This looks like my time's up, so thanks. Y'all have a good one.
Next up, I have David Hagan.
David Hagan, Smith Creek, Christiansburg, Virginia. I want to thank the Board of Supervisors, the members of the board who are finally addressing this issue after 25 years in the making. Most merchants, large and small, sincerely do appreciate it. I realize that some of you, I'm not going to change your mind, but I would ask you to focus on the unfairness of this honor system tax when you vote tonight. It's clear that this tax is not equal and it's not distributed fairly across the board. It's a voluntary tax that I no longer volunteer to pay. The Supreme Court agreed 22 years ago that no company had to pay it by simply moving their inventory for one day. But in good faith, we've paid the tax. And because we were promised at the time, 25 years ago, after the tax was cut, Ms. Biggs, you're the only one that was here then, that more would be done. Yeah, enough is enough. This has only gotten worse with online merchants, as the other gentleman talked about earlier. They pay none of these taxes. Many of the merchants from the county, they've done their part for many, many years. It's time now for the board to do their part. We need more time. That's been the theme of a couple of the meetings. I don't know what you're going to find or investigate 30 days from now that you haven't figured out in the last 25 years. Some of the people on the board, or maybe even the audience, they want to frame my actions as against the school. That's a very ridiculous thought. We have given millions of dollars to the 57 schools that we support from Motor Mile. Where would we replace the money? That should be a secondary thought in your mind. The unfairness of the tax should be the primary. And how to replace it, obviously we're going to replace it with growth. We're expecting 10, 15% growth in the next 5 years here in the county. In 1998, when I first started with this, there were 75,000 people in Montgomery County, and now there's well over 100,000. To show you the unfairness of this tax, about 900 people filed this tax in 1998. About 900 people filed today. How could it possibly be fair and distributed equally? It can't be. This discourages large businesses from coming to our counties because of taxes like this. For example, Backcountry, I think you all received a letter from them and you know clearly their position on this. So it's time to take a step forward for fairness and progress. Please vote tonight to eliminate this unfair tax. Thanks.
Thank you. As I call up the next speaker, then I'll call the speaker before them, so you'll be ready. I'll have Gary Duncan, and after Gary, I have a Patricia Kolestai. I apologize if I mispronounced that name.
I'm Gary Duncan, 2050 Roanoke Street, Christiansburg. My family's been in the automobile business here for 67 years, so we've paid pretty good tax along the way. I can't add a lot more than what's already been said, other than our family has operated in West Virginia, we've operated in Rocky Mount, Virginia, we've operated in Pulaski, we've operated in Roanoke. And it's not a fair tax. I mean, I know we have to generate money for schools and so forth. I'm for all that, but just look at it a different way. This merchant's capital tax is antique, kind of like myself. But just please reconsider tonight. And we appreciate what all y'all do, and we know that it's been a lot of controversy for a lot of years, but I think if you look back and you look at other municipalities, it's pretty antique tax. But thank you for my time, and thank you for all y'all do.
Thank you. Patricia Kolaski, and after that, Marissa Sachs.
Hi, my name is Patricia Kolatosti. I live at 1580 Taylor Hollow Road in Blacksburg. I'm not against any sort of reappropriation of taxes. I just think the way this has gone about doesn't work. In this county, we talk about taxes and tax rates in March and April. That's when people expect it. We've got a 2023 reassessment coming up. What are you going to tell people if you abolish this tonight, and now we have to tell them, oh, your residential real estate tax rate or your business real estate tax rate now has to go up more because we got rid of this other one, but we didn't give you the chance to address all of the tax rates at once. We need to table this tonight, move this to the spring, and address all of them. You have a really small variety of taxes. Let's see what the community thinks about what is fair and equitable and how we should distribute this. Your own staff report shows that we're going to have to either raise taxes or blow a minor hole in the school budget to make this work. We need to have the community's ideas, and everybody, not just a few people. Second, abolish is too final. I have no problem with looking at something. One person said, let's look at changing rates. Yes, let's look at changing rates. But if you abolish it, you now tie the hands of future boards. You have no idea what someone in the future could face. You don't know how business structures are going to change. If you abolish it, it becomes very different and very difficult to get it back. You could set a tax rate at 0 if you wanted to. That would get rid of it, but you would not tie the hands of people in the future. This is a fiscally conservative and fiscally responsible board. And part of that is looking at what could happen in the future and allowing there to be some flexibility. Your own legislative priorities agenda says you don't have enough diversity in revenue streams. If you get rid of one of those, you're telling the legislature, well, it doesn't really matter. I got plenty of diversity. I can get rid of one. So let's not look at abolish. Let's look at evaluate. Let's look at moving this to the spring so we can actually, as a community, when the community expects to be discussing taxes, and they will be expecting it this spring, look at all of them. Let's look at the personal property tax. Let's look at the real estate. If you drop this tax, what happens to the machine and tools tax that businesses pay? Does that have to go up? Does that negatively affect businesses? If you look at other counties, sure, they might not have this. Roanoke County, which is very similar to Montgomery County, on your own staff report brings in close to $7 million in a BPOL tax. Is that what our businesses want? Is that what's going to come out? Where is that information coming from? So I think you do need more information. I think we need to move this to the spring so we can discuss everything, the suite of revenue that supports the public services and the world-class school system that we have, and see what is important to the community. And don't look at abolishing. You have the ability to really change things just by changing rates. Thank you.
Next up, Marissa Sachs, and after her, Carlos Elias?
Thank you, Board of Supervisors. I first want to say thank you for what you do. I truly understand how challenging and difficult that it can be. I sent everyone an email, and I'm going to refer to it just so the public can hear my comments, but I think you all have received them already. So I've been in the business community pushing 25 years now, and I have been very fortunate that we use just-in-time inventory. So I don't carry inventory. So I'm not here for myself tonight. I'm here for all of the larger retailers and small businesses that do carry inventory, which is much needed in order to have their business. So at the last meeting, I was a little discouraged because I did hear that several agreed that the tax was outdated. It's unfair. I've heard all of the same things. But then at the same time, I also heard to put the tax back on businesses because nobody knew how to fill the hole this year. And that's something that I really want to talk about. If on record you truly do feel like it's an unfair tax, how could there possibly be any other option but to immediately absolve it? Immediately. You can't say that something is unfair and then still charge the businesses because you have a hole to fill. And I truly understand that filling the hole in the budget is a major responsibility. I do. But I also know that putting it back into the business owner's laps, that's not fair. Perhaps the best option is to reduce expenses. You could pull from reserves. There's a lot of ARPA funds that came through. And I feel like you need to support your small businesses. And here's why. One, they provide jobs for the community. They also provide sales tax income. They provide food tax income, lodging tax income. They bring tourism to your area, and so much more. You know, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get a major chain sponsor your little league teams, but you're going to get a small business do it every time. Those names on the back of those jerseys, they're local. So today, I want to wrap up, and I appreciate what everyone said before me because I agree with those statements to abolish it. But I also want to say that if you feel it's unfair, then it should be immediate. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Carlos, Elias, and then James Cowan.
Good evening, I'm Carlos Elias, or Elias if you speak Spanish, 1265 Moose Drive. I run a very small business here in Christiansburg. We're so small we only have 7 people. We were assessed a tax of $1,000.90 with 56 cents, which is due now on December 5th. I strongly support the elimination of the merchant's capital tax because it is equivalent to a confiscation of a small business assets, resulting in an incentive framework that actively encourages underinvestment in capital. In turn, when you underinvest in capital, it results in lower profits and less employment opportunities in our county. It puts small businesses at a disadvantage compared to other businesses that do not need to pay a fee for holding inventories. In other words, the merchant's capital tax taxes our losses because we purchase inventory to sell it, not to keep it. It is not possible to purchase the exact amount of inventory that will be sold. Inevitably, a sizable share of inventory purchases are not sold every year. This is not the whole story. I mean, listen to this. The worse the business does, the more inventory we accumulate. Therefore, the more we keep inventory, the more taxes we pay. So when businesses are doing poorly, our tax receipts increase. Should it not be the other way around? So please eliminate this unfair, obsolete, and anti-business tax. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. After James Cowan, we have Stacy Martin.
Thank you, members of the board. Jim Cowan, 612 Piedmont Street, Blacksburg, Virginia. Had the opportunity to visit with you last time on this issue and back again tonight on behalf of Backcountry Sports. I know they've sent a letter to you and communicated their feelings about this tax. I think most of you know they're a large online retailer. The distribution center they have in Christiansburg is over 300,000 square feet. In the time they've been here since they built that, they have grown that workforce to over 300 employees, most of whom are county residents. They've invested many millions of dollars into that facility and continue to invest in it just over the last few years to meet the demand for product on the East Coast. Unfortunately, the result of that is over time they're paying an increasing cost to be here. I mean, they're on the run right now that's about $1 million every couple of years. They're the highest payer currently of the tax. I think it's a little over $300,000 last year. But they compete with online retailers that are based anywhere, right? They're not a retail location just selling locally. They're distributing product to the entire East Coast and competing with other online retailers of sporting and outdoor goods. And this is the largest tax cost they have as a company. And they do think that there's a fairness issue there, and they're asking you to look at that. They pay all the other taxes that other county businesses pay, whether that's real estate, sales tax, all the things that go that everyone else pays in the county. And so from their standpoint, it is an impediment to their growth, right? If they have to think about growing here versus keeping product at their West Coast distribution facility, that's something they have to think about. This is a tax on inventory that's pretty uncommon. I think only about 11 states, Virginia being one of them, still use this tax. I think you heard some data that many counties in Virginia have gotten rid of it over time because they don't want to dissuade employers like Backcountry that are big contributors to the economy from locating and keeping inventory in their jurisdiction. We want them to do more business here, not less. And so they're asking that you look at that and give some consideration to their opinion. After I spoke on this on their behalf, a number of other clients that we work with also reached out and started looking or thinking about this issue, everyone from smaller companies like Nick Ryan Associates and folks we work with. I had two that I thought would make good examples this evening that are a little bit different aspects just to show you the breadth of businesses that this tax impacts. One is Fireworks by Grucci. Many of you may know out at the Arsenal, they make fireworks that are used in a lot of displays across the U.S. and the Middle East, all over the world. They're one of the premier firework manufacturers and providers. Well, they're paying over $20,000 a year in tax to keep some of that inventory here. They've got 5, I think, distribution and locations where they do this around the world, most of those in the U.S. And so growing that here has a cost. Keeping people here to distribute from here is a tax on them. And they like this area. I think their very first fireworks show many years ago in this area was actually out at Claytor Lake many years ago. Another example would be the owners of the Christiansburg Marketplace. They've got a large retail location there, and this tax is something that a business looking at taking a large retail place, a large format type retailer, that's a cost that they have to incur. So you see across a pretty broad range of businesses that are paying all the other state taxes also have this additional charge or weight or drag that they have to overcome when they do business here. And so from that standpoint, from a fairness standpoint, we really appreciate your consideration and hope that you will decide this evening that it's time to do what many other jurisdictions have done and remove that tax from our rolls. Thank you so much.
I have Stacy Martin and then a Jerry Hilton.
Hello, I'm Stacy Martin, 1480 Turnberry Lane, Minor. So I own several businesses here in the county, and I think last time I told you there's some history. I have a little bit more for you tonight. I'm a history buff. But I had to apologize. Apparently this is my family's fault. In 1607, my 8th grandfather landed in Jamestown. He was part of the 7 named in the Virginia Charter, Captain John Martin. He helped establish the Virginia Constitution, well, what later became the Constitution, but beginning. So apparently he brought this bad habit of merchant's capital tax from England. But it started actually in Medici, Italy. The Medici family was the most influential family of the world at the time, most rich. They actually built Florence. And basically they were hated and kind of like Bill Gates and some of the other Bezos of the world of the day. So they decided, how can we tax and create taxes? So they didn't have income tax. So they decided, you know what? They're merchants and they're really, really profitable. Let's actually start taxing what they have on hand. That's how it happened. 1066, when William the Conqueror, my great-great-great-grandfather, way back, he came with him, and he started it there as well, from Normandy. So, as I said, it's partly my family's fault, and I apologize. But I talked to my 8th great-grandfather today, and he said, get rid of this thing. We didn't mean it to go this far. Of course, I didn't talk to him, but that's just kind of an analogy. But as some people say, businesses are freeloading. That is far from the truth. We pay the majority of the real estate tax in Montgomery County. It'd be really nice to actually get that statistic from the county of how much is business property tax versus real estate, personal real estate tax. I live here too. I pay $5,000 a year to the county. Just got my $2,000 tax bill for my cars. And thank you very much. I am thinking about getting the heck out of this county quick. I'm looking at land in Floyd right now because this is enough. So my business does not have children. It does not require rec centers. It does not require anything but just a simple thing of fire and safety. We pay enough real estate tax, and so therefore I am not freeloading on anyone. I create 1% local revenue for the part of the sales tax. We pay BPOL tax. We pay Social Security tax like everybody else does, the half that the people are paying. So we're not freeloaders. You know, we have personal property as well. We're paying for those merchant things to create that capital, which we paid sales tax to buy those same assets to create the capital. It's a convoluted mess. But interestingly enough, to do a little more research, I noticed Bedford County is actually advertising no merchants capital tax in our county. So this is one reason they want people to come there. Only 13 states have it, but I would encourage you to look at Tax Foundation. They're a nonprofit. And it actually says the most striking feature of Virginia's local business taxes, despite their relative modesty in terms of burdens on an individual basis, there are several to keep track of. Now, merchants capital being one of them. But what was really striking, it said that it creates economic severe distortions. Inventory taxes like merchant capital tax are problematic because they dilute the incentive to bring products to the area. That's the problem we have in Montgomery County. Because people are constantly saying we don't have enough businesses here and we don't have enough choices. Thank you.
Jerry Hilton, and then after Mr. Hilton, Ed Bridge.
My name is Jerry Hilton. I live at 655 Canyon Road. I'm not a business owner. I do work for one of the businesses that's here. But my thoughts on this is everyone's wondering where the revenue will be replaced from. And I've been in this room before, and I've looked at this marvelous, beautiful waste of money that we're sitting in tonight, knowing that the county can look inside with the way they spend money and can replace this revenue with being frugal. I'm all for education, but every time we build a school, we pay someone millions of dollars to draw blueprints to make this one nicer than the last one, so the next one's got to be nicer than the other one. A single plan for a school, plan for your county buildings that's copied every time without all the overhead would more than take care of what you're going to lose. We need to look inside so we can grow the county. With there's more businesses, we get more people. With more people, we get more shopping, we get more revenue, we get more people going out and eating and doing the things that need to be done. But right now, the only way you can get business in here is to say, hey, we're going to waive this tax we charge everybody else for 7 years, 8 years, long enough for you to get in here and make your money and then leave. You know, this is a tax that hurts the people who have grown your county, who live here, and who want to continue to do business here. And I would like to see it done away with and we look at ways to better use what's gained each from property tax as well as these other taxes. Thank you.
Ed Bridge.
Hey, thank you very much. Ed Bridge, 2890 North Franklin Street, Christiansburg. And so I kind of agree with all my colleagues, what they said. And I guess basically at the end, to keep this short, I feel like with this tax, it should end because I feel like as a county, we're cutting off our nose to spite our face. I think that, you know, with all the investments coming down here and huge money, that I think that as the larger businesses come down, you actually make more money in revenue than what's going on right now. And that's it. I just feel like as a county, we're just like kind of like cutting off our nose to despite ourselves. And then we end a tax and bring larger businesses here, I think we'll be a lot more happier. I'm done. Thank you very much.
That concludes the list. However, if anyone would like to come forward to speak on this public hearing, you'll have 4 minutes to state your name and address.
My name is Donna Sawyers. I live at 2471 Crown Road, Shawsville, Virginia, and y'all probably remember me from last time. But there were several things I wanted to bring up, like they were mentioning the schools, and I'm all for the schools too. Of course, we all have families. However, wasn't the lottery supposed to help all the schools when they are supposed to give, I think, $780 million, which $5.7 million go to each county? And I thought that was why the lottery was allowed. I don't play the lottery, but a lot of people evidently do. And that's one thing that should help the schools if you're worried about the schools. But I don't think it's time to continue and continue. I think it's time to abolish. When we first started our business, which is Sawyer's Bus Sales, we thought about going to Pulaski because of this and because of all the other things that are in Montgomery County. But I grew up here. My husband grew up here. I didn't want to leave Montgomery County. So that's why I'm asking. Pulaski, we could have made a lot more money because people wanting buses don't come to Montgomery County for buses. Pulaski would have been fine. But I'm sure you can understand our point here. And so, and I also had some other things too, but mostly about the schools because I heard several comments on that. And we're not, it's like the other gentleman said too, we're not trying to take away anything. There are so many things in Montgomery County that, to me, I see everybody likes nice things that are being built, but are they necessary enough to take away your merchants? Because we do not buy inventory at the end of the year, so therefore we lose inventory that we could have bought because we have to buy it at certain prices or we don't get it at all. Well, you know, if we don't buy it, then we probably won't get it at all to sell for the whole year the next year. So again, I'm asking, please abolish this. Don't continue it. And I appreciate you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say one more thing? I think there are a lot of people here that aren't speaking that are for the abolishment of this. Would you mind if they stood? And you see my point. Thank you so much.
Would anyone else like to come forward and speak?
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Chris Obenchain. I live at 1108 Morning Dove Drive in Blacksburg. And I would like to lend my voice as well this evening in favor of repealing the merchant's capital tax. As I was doing some research on this tax and on this topic, I was surprised to find out that actually only 45 of Virginia's 95 counties even have this tax at all. So less than half of Virginia's counties even use this tax. It's clearly not a necessary tax, and it's clearly, as you've heard tonight already and more eloquently, it's an outdated tax. It's simply one that hasn't kept up with the times, and certainly we as a community, we know that times change, and we have to keep up with that, and we have to adjust our approach to keep up with those times. You know, I'm here tonight not as a business owner. I don't have a business. This tax doesn't affect me personally, but I'm here to speak in support of our small businesses, because our small businesses are a lifeblood of our community, and they're very important. It's important that we continue to support them. And when you have the opportunity to remove this tax burden from our small businesses, that can do so much for our community and for families and individuals in our community. It allows businesses to reinvest, to grow their businesses in ways that they couldn't have before. It allows them to hire new workers. It allows them to retain workers in an economic climate such as we're going through right now. That's going to be very important, that businesses have the resources necessary to even retain the workforce that they have today. So, you know, I ask you to support the working families and the small businesses in our community. And I think another point that has been brought up numerous times this evening, which has struck me, is the fact of, you've heard several businesses say that they have thought about relocating to other areas because of this tax. Well, I ask you to think of, for all of those that you've heard here tonight, Montgomery County businesses say that they have considered relocating. Think of the ones who are not in this room tonight. Think of the businesses that already made that decision, either not to locate in Montgomery County or to relocate out of Montgomery County, because those are also businesses that have been affected by this tax. So I ask you to take that into consideration, continue to support our businesses, and please continue to look for ways as well to support our working families here in Montgomery County. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to come forward? You have 4 minutes to address the board. Seeing no one come forward, we will close this public hearing. Next up, public address. I do not have anyone signed up for public address, but any citizen can come forward. They'll have 4 minutes to address the board if you'll state your name and address.
Good evening, board. Thank you for giving me this chance to speak. My name is Bob Beard. I live here in Christiansburg. I'm here to, some of you guys probably realize, we can't afford to keep doing business as usual. You know, gasoline prices have increased 30 cents in just the last 2 weeks. Bank of America today is forecasting we should expect to lose 175,000 jobs a month next year. The new interest rate hike we just had will increase our debt by $2 trillion in just interest payments alone. Okay, do you know how long it would take you to spend $1 trillion? If you spend a dollar every second, it would take you 30,000 years to spend $1 trillion. That's how much money $1 trillion is. You know, I just got my property tax bill, and you know that's a pretty big increase. Again, we just can't keep doing what we're doing. You know, we need you guys to be good stewards of our county's money. You know, I've also been speaking about the Salem High School renovation, trying to compare it to the Christiansburg renovation trying to get underway. And I found a good article in the Roanoke Times, and this is from August 22nd, and I'll send this text to Vicki so she can pass it around. But, you know, I've been saying it was 40 million, but it's only $35 million. The school, the renovation is $35 million. We're at $100 million, 3 times more, okay? That school is at 1,200 students. We have 1,050, I'm sorry. My phone.
Thank you. We were getting a little nervous. Where is that?
I'm sorry. Christiansburg High School's got only 1,050 students, and I looked it up, and it didn't appear to be growing at all. Okay, but Salem's at 1,200 students. Okay, and yet and this new construction, they added 20 new classrooms. Okay, and all kinds of other bells and whistles, natural light for windows. Like I said, it's all in this article. I'm not going to sit here and read the article to you. They want you, you know, but all the things that they said they needed to have done at CHS as was done at Salem for a third of the cost. Okay. All right, let's see what else. Let's talk about student population. I've mentioned this several times before. You know, MCPS can move hundreds of students from Blacksburg to Christiansburg if they need to Auburn and East Montgomery without increasing any costs. You know, those schools are operating at 65 and 70% of efficiency, so they can move students there and teachers without any additional costs at all. Okay. Also, this will improve the socioeconomic issues at those schools and improve the equity across our whole county. All right, and let's talk about accountability. You know, 90% of the MCPS budget is payroll. That's $120 million in payroll for a school system with declining SOL scores. You know, you have a group of teachers who are speaking up. They don't like the new English curriculum. Why? You know, I've also did some research on private schools. There's 7 private schools in our county with approximately 2,100 students. There's 800 homeschoolers, and we have 10,000 students in MCPS. The cost of a student to go to MCPS is $13,500. The private school costs range from $4,300 to $7,200, half of what MCPS costs to go to private school in this county. There's a for West Virginia Supreme Court. There's an article you guys need to read about that, about finding money so that it's constitutional to give parents money to be pro-choice in this state, in our county. So my question is, it's your job, it's your responsibility, it's your duty to now become great stewards of our money. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to come forward? Seeing no one come forward, I will close public address. Addendum?
No addendum this evening, Madam Chair.
No addendum. To have a motion to move into work session.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. Fidzikowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. DeMott?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Board members, this evening, Mark Magruder is going to give us a review of the county's year-end financial position and talk a little bit about where we are. And then Angie's going to share with us some of the thoughts on some of those revenues some of those balances moving forward. So, Mark?
Okay, good evening. I'm going to give you a little financial update on our fiscal year 22 year end. I'd like to give a little background information about different categories of county revenue. So as we've talked about in the past, county revenue falls into 2 separate categories: undesignated revenue and designated revenue. The difference is whether or not the revenues are restricted. So undesignated revenues are unrestricted revenues, meaning that they can be basically used for just about any purpose, whereas designated revenues are restricted revenues. They're earmarked for a specific purpose and can only be used for that purpose. And so when you look at the county's total revenue structure, you'll notice that about 89%, or the bulk of the county's revenue structure, is undesignated revenue. So that money can be pretty much used for any purpose. And about 11% is designated or earmarked for a specific purpose. So I want to go back, if you remember back last January when we were talking about building the fiscal year 23 budget, I presented preliminary revenue projections for fiscal year 23, but we wanted to look at where we were in fiscal year 22. And at that time, I told the board that the county would likely exceed our 22 revenue estimates by a pretty good margin. And I'll give you that number and then I'll come back to it. So at that time, I said it looked like we would exceed our estimates by $7.5 million. What actually happened as we went through the year, undesignated revenue collections exceeded estimates by $7.2 million, or roughly 5.91%. But that number included roughly $700,000 in prepaid taxes that are actually due in fiscal year 23. So that number will get netted off when I show the next chart that shows where we compare on that number. And really, again, as we talked back in the spring, of that 7.5 million, the majority of that money was one-time money that was due to pent-up demand, some stimulus money, and really, people were, indoors during the pandemic, and then they got out and they started spending. On our designated revenue collections, designated general fund revenues, after we adjust for CSA and locally administered road projects, they exceeded revenue estimates by $35,000 and were within 0.23 of the estimate. So once we adjusted for all the revenues, undesignated revenues were within 4.79% of our estimates. So this chart actually shows where we stood on a cash basis at year-end fiscal year 22. And as you can see, undesignated revenues exceeded the estimates by 7.1, or almost 7.2 million. And designated revenues, $45,000 in total. So total increase was $7.2 million. But then again, we had some taxes that were prepaid taxes that are not actually due until fiscal year 23. When we net those off of the undesignated revenue piece, we end up at $6.5 million over our estimates. On the designated revenue side, again, we make an adjustment for our CSA and locally administered roads. And the reason we do that, those are reimbursement revenues. Those are tied to expenses that may or may not have happened, and the reimbursement may actually have crossed fiscal years. So we pull those out to show you what the real revenue estimate was versus where we really came in for the time period in which those revenues are reported. And as you look at the total, after we adjust all revenues, we were roughly $6.5 million above our estimates for the year. Okay, so I wanted to go back again. The original estimate was that we would exceed our revenues by $7.5 million. Our actual year-end collections of excess revenue was $6.5 million. And so what happened was there was the excess revenue number, it actually slowed down a little bit throughout the year from the original estimate. And that actually happened over a 3-month period. I reported to you guys around 7.5 million in January. That number stayed relatively consistent until we got to April. And then April, May, and June, that number tailed significantly. And we went from me estimating you at 7.5 to actually coming in at 6.5 million. That slowdown was anticipated for fiscal year 23 and is reflected in the 23 budget. So I didn't get super aggressive because I knew those numbers were looking like they were tailing, and I knew they were one-time in nature, so we didn't build them into the budget going forward. I'm going to turn it over to Angie. She's going to talk about our total cash, and then I'll come back in a minute and finish up the remainder of the presentation.
Thanks, Mark. And Angie's going to stay where she is. And
Mark's going to stay where he is.
I'm going to stay here, but I'll finish at the end.
Everybody's staying where they are. That's right.
It's Mark. We talk about the total cash, and this is the cash in the county's general fund, so it's the cash that's available for general operating purposes. We didn't get this cash in 1 year. It's accumulated over the life of the county. It can be compared to your own bank account. You don't accumulate what's in your bank account necessarily in a year based on your current year's income. It happens over time. So I think that's important to recognize that this did not happen in 1 year. We do update you periodically as to what the cash balances are because it's really important to help us measure our financial health. The way that entities measure financial health is by looking at their overall operating position, and there's 3 factors that we consider when we do that. The first is the ability to maintain sufficient cash to pay our expenses as they come due. That's the first item that we look at. Secondly, we look at our ability to maintain reserves. And then finally, it's very important that we budget balance the budget with revenue that we collect in that year, that we don't have to use fund balance to balance the budget. This graphic is fairly new. I think last year is the first year that we presented it this way. It shows at the bottom what our total cash balance was at the end of the year, and then it breaks it into the categories that are the pillars that hold the county up, and those include our cash flow reserves, our appropriations that we've made this year out of the June 30th fund balance. The middle category is new, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, but it's some funds that we received after year end to repay an advance that was made for school capital projects. And then we have some other reserves, and then we have the undesignated cash balance. And the next slide is one that we have seen for years and years. It shows the relationship and how we come up with the numbers between categories. So as I said, the first number is the cash, the operating cash of the general fund. We back out of that the estimated amount of cash that we need to fund our cash flow needs. And Mark, if you go to the next slide for just a second, we look at the past 24-month period because we collect our major sources of revenue twice a year. We have to look at our cash inflows and outflows and make sure that we have enough cash on hand to cover our lowest point in cash. Those typically occur in September or October, and then again, our other low point occurs usually in April. That's because that's just before we get our tax payments. And as you can see on this graph, in September of 21, our low point in cash was just under $26 million. So that's the number that we use for our reserve this time. We can go back to the other slide, the previous slide. We had been running at about that number at 24 million for several years. That maintained a sufficient balance to cover our cash flow needs. It makes sense that as our budget grows, that number is going to go up because our expenses are more. So we did increase that for this year. We'll continue to look at that on a 24-month cycle. Another way that you can look at whether or not you have enough cash on hand is to make sure that you have enough to cover. Some people use a rule of thumb of 3 months of cash, of expenses. That works somewhat for us, but not quite as cleanly as it would as if we collected cash evenly throughout the year. I know that some of you are on boards and commissions that say we need 3 months of cash. That doesn't work exactly the same for the county because we don't have even revenue throughout the year. The third item on this is the $5 million. If you recall, we advanced funds to the county, to the school capital project fund before they issued bonds so that they could get started on the Christiansburg High School project. We did issue those bonds before year end, but we didn't repay those to the county general fund until July. So we needed to add those back in because they were not reflected in the $54 million number that we started with on the left-hand side of the page. Right in the middle of the page is our appropriations that we've made so far. These appropriations of $11.3 million have been made since June 30th. You can see a breakdown. I'm not going to go through every item with you, but you can see the major categories are county purchase orders, and then several items for the schools, their purchase orders and carry forward. We also transferred funds to the school debt service fund to shave the debt in future years, the next few years, to shave the peak of that so that we didn't have to find revenue other ways to cover that cost. Then if we look at the next number, $6.5 million, that's our designated reserve number. This is the emergency fund. We have several different categories that make that up. Most of them stay the same from year to year, but some of them change based on the previous year's budget. For example, the line of duty reserve, we include ongoing operating funding in our budget for the line of duty cost. If we have some money left over from that at the end of the year, we roll it into this reserve. That is similar for the animal shelter donations and EDA incentives and the technology reserve. Finally, that brings us to our cash balance that we haven't allocated or set aside, which is $15.9 million for this year. And last year, if you want to compare the past several years, actually, at the bottom of the page, it shows our unallocated balances as of August 31st of each year. It is slightly higher than last year, but not significantly higher. And we have two items for you to take action on your agenda later tonight. The first one is the county carry forward of $1.1 million, and then the fiscal year 23 county capital fund of $3.7 million. We've also discussed with you capital projects that are included in the CIP for future years, and we're going to bring that back to you as well, which is just under just under $8 million. If you back those out, we have a balance of $3.1 million. And as you can see, most of the years that are shown below are more than that. There are at this point in the year, because you're going to probably continue to appropriate some things out of fund balance, so that will get drawn down throughout the year. There were a few years from 2012 to 2014 that we hovered around this number, but since then the number has been substantially higher.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about fiscal year 23 revenue picture and what we're looking forward to in fiscal year 24. Currently, the county is on track to exceed our fiscal year 23 revenue estimates. It's early in the year. We're not going to have a year like we had in 2022. I don't know what those numbers are going to look like. It's too early, but I can tell you that there are several categories that are showing strong revenue numbers. Those are sales tax, and our interest earnings are up. Going into fiscal year 24, there's still a significant amount of uncertainty in the economy. Inflation, interest rates, business inventory, and supply chain issues are still creating issues going forward. That makes projecting revenue fairly difficult. But as we go through the process, I will keep the board updated as we go through the year. And then back to the 22 numbers, I still believe a portion of this additional growth is likely to be one-time in nature. We know a large portion of last year's money was one-time in nature that is not going to be available in future years. So as we go through the fiscal year 24 budget process, I'll give you more updates. We'll know more when we get numbers from reassessment, where we stand on real estate. I'll have a better picture of where sales tax is going once we get at least 6 months into the year. And then once we start to see collections on our personal property taxes, I'll have a better idea of where those numbers are going to be. And then in January, I'll come forward with a preliminary revenue estimate and kind of set the stage for where we're headed when we get into fiscal year 24 budget. And with that, I don't have anything else to add, so I will gladly answer any questions you may have, or you can ask Angie questions about her part, or you can ask me. I can try and answer those as well.
Certainly. We'll go around the room. Supervisor Bone.
Thanks so much, Mark. You're kind of falling off your game because it's 5% this year, not 1 or 0.5% like it's been in the years past, right? What happened? I'm
yeah,
kidding.
well, I mean,
I'm kidding. I'm
yeah.
kidding. Great job. So on slide 7 for the cash balance, does any of the one-time money show up?
Yes, the one-time money is included in that. Mm-hmm. The money that he's talking about, the excess revenue, mm-hmm. It is included in that.
Mm-hmm. In any of the previous years back to 2012, did we ever have any one-time money like that?
Not like this. We might have had one-time money, but as you said earlier, he was usually within 1% of our revenue estimates. Mm-hmm. This is not a precedented event, right?
So back in 2008, 2009, 2010, when we were pulling out of the Great Recession, was there any one-time money impacting?
Not at that time. I mean, in fact, I think if we go back that far, in 2008, 2009, I think there was only 1 year in which we missed revenue, meaning that we brought in less money than what I had anticipated, and it was during the recession. Sure. And it wasn't by a huge margin. We were like at 99%, but it was close. But what's happened over the last year and a half is, you know, there's been a tremendous amount of liquidity in the market, and that's creating a host of issues, and I don't know when it's going to clear itself. You know, as I told you in the presentation, when we looked at the revenues in January, I was like, we're at 7.5, and by the time we got to where we are now, it was 6.5. I don't know where we're going. I just know we're going in that direction, and as I've tried to explain, the U.S. economy is like a large ship. You know, movement is very slow, so things that happen now can take 18 to 20 months before we see the impact of them. So a lot of the decisions that were made, you know, a year and a half ago is what we're seeing the impact of. And so it's going to take some time. We will be revisiting where our revenue picture is next August, because I don't know what motor vehicle values are going to do again. And a lot of that's going to be predicated on how the economy does over the next 12 months.
Next slide, slide 8.
Can you put the presentation on slide 8?
Oops.
So if our, what the right terminology is, my apologies. The estimated amount needed for the operational cash flow reserve, okay, is $26 million, and it wasn't $26 million last year that I can recall.
It was 24.
Yeah, so how did you dance around September 2021 when we didn't have the cash flow? We didn't have that in
Oh, I can answer
reserve.
that question. If you would back up one more slide. Because we have the reserves that are the $6.5 million, sometimes we use those funds. We don't, or there were funds in the very last box. So, you know, we don't have these dollars in real boxes, right? They're all together. So they're fluid and we can use them as we need them.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Supervisor Shepherd.
I don't have any questions. I say this every year. I don't know how you do it. But keep up the good work. Thank you.
Supervisor Fidzikowski.
Yeah, I don't have any questions either, but appreciate everything that you do.
Supervisor King.
Don't have no question, but I do appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you.
Supervisor DeMott.
I have just a couple of questions, and one area where I apologize. I stopped taking notes to take notes somewhere else, so my notes trailed off, so I need some clarity. On slide number 3, I had started to write the sources, the majority sources of the undesignated revenue collections, and that's where my notes just dropped off.
Okay, so there were actually, there were like 3 areas in which, I mean, all the revenue estimates were pretty tight, but there were 3 that drove the lion's share of this, and those were delinquent taxes, which again were mostly one-time monies. Once that delinquent money goes away, it's not going to be there anymore. That was roughly $2.1 million. Sales tax, again, there was a lot of pent-up demand, and there was a lot of money pushed into the system. That was $2.2 million. And then recordation, which was the sale of real estate. There was a tremendous amount of real estate that was sold within the last year. And every time a house transaction occurs, a sale occurs, there's a recordation fee that is charged on that. And so there was roughly $1 million there. So just those 3 categories alone were $5.3 million of the $6.5 million in excess money. Most of the other revenue categories were fairly close to the estimates.
I appreciate that because in asking, I got even more information, so thank you very much. Excuse me, a couple, it seems like you're unsure of the future, your crystal ball is cloudy. We talk about how you often have, Supervisor Bond mentioned it, you're often so very close, and it seems like you're a little bit unsure for the reasons you outlined on one of these slides. Hold on. On slide number 9, inflation, interest rates, business inventory, and supply chain issues. I understand all of that. But in the previous bullet, you had said that we're on track to exceed our fiscal year 23 estimates. Our interest earnings are up. So can you explain the tie between being concerned about interest rates, but also our interest earnings being up, and how that is tracking ahead of the game?
So when I set the revenue, if we're just talking about interest earnings, when I set the revenue estimate, we had talked to the bank where the Fed funds rate was at the time. And as the Fed funds rate has increased, the bank has been increasing their rate with us. And so I'm going to exceed that estimate clearly because, the Fed funds rate was at virtually nothing. And now it's, sky high. Well, not sky high, but it's moved significantly from where we were. So we're starting to see that extra interest earnings that I didn't have programmed in the budget, because at the time I didn't know how quickly the Fed was going to move. We knew they were going to move, but with the amount of liquidity in the market, some banks don't have an incentive to provide higher interest rates. I think that you can go look at your own personal bank, and some banks are offering great rates, and some are virtually offering nothing. And a lot of that has to do with how much liquidity they have on their books and whether they really have any interest in providing you with a higher interest rate. If they don't need your money, they're not going to provide a higher interest rate to get it. So there's some of that going on. And so until we know where the Fed funds rate lands and ends, where they're going to stop increasing, and what the bank is willing to pay us, that's going to kind of drive that number. And so that's still fluid on that particular revenue source. Now, you asked about another one.
Well, I was the sales tax being up, but I don't really need any clarity on that. But it sounds like if our interest earnings are up, we've made good banking choices as a county.
You could say that.
And then just a clarifying question, because I know this has been answered, but when do we expect to get a first presentation or a sneak peek of anything related to real estate tax reassessments?
They're going to present at your next board meeting.
Okay.
Gary Eanes from Wampler Eanes he's not going to have exact numbers for you, but he will be able to provide additional information.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Vice Chair Biggs.
I want to go back to something that Ms. Hill mentioned just for educational purposes that I think is important to put out there. And that is like when you're looking at your reserve funds, your financial planners sort of tell you how much you should have in case there is an emergency. And you mentioned the 3-month sort of limit. I think it's important for folks to understand exactly, what we're talking about and how that also affects our bond rating. So can you sort of elaborate on that? Like if we were to have an emergency, we need to have backup funds to be able to pay our bills.
That's exactly right. If there was an emergency and we couldn't collect taxes, you would need funds to make payroll and pay the utility bills and the other things that we need to pay. While we don't have 3 months of expense in the $26 million number, if you add $26 million and the $6.5 million of reserves, that does equal about 3 months of our undesignated expenditures, because we can assume that we're going to keep collecting funds from the state and federal government. So if you pull those out, we would have 3 months of reserves. But it is crucially important to the bond rating agencies, and they say that every time they give us ratings. You have to have reserves. You have to be able to fund your budget with ongoing funds, with revenue, and you need to be able to make your meet your cash flow needs. So those are critical points, and they're listed for you on that slide 7 on the bottom left.
Okay, thank you. I think that's important to understand when you're looking at the overall, budgeting that goes on in the county and what all the things that are considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. On this, with these, and I understand our bond rating is dependent on our cash flow, that we have money to show that we're a good financial stewards, and then the 6.5 for the reserves that Vice Chair Biggs is talking about. Does this also include our contingencies in here as well?
The contingencies are separate from that. The contingencies address more operating things that aren't necessarily going to recur and they're emergencies, but not at the same level of these kinds of things. These are more emergencies, and contingencies are more unexpected things that occur within the operations of the county in a year.
And how much do we have in our contingencies? Is that 1% or?
1%.
It's 1% of the general fund, is that right?
It's
about-
roughly $500,000.
Okay, for our contingency. So with this, and then, Mark, thank you. This was a great presentation. I'm glad to hear that we were exceeding our estimates by $6.5 million. That means that we're in good standing financially, correct?
That's correct.
That's all I have. Anybody else have a follow-up? As always, thank you, Mark. We appreciate your work. Okay. We will take a quick 10-minute break, and then we will, I'm sorry. Oh, motion to come out of work session.
Motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Fidzikowski?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Now, Mr. King, we can have a 10-minute recess. Come back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Well.
That's good. That's about the float.
to continue. Items of consent. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion and a second.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Demotts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Fidzikowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
New business. Ordinance to abolish the merchant's capital tax.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Go around the room. Start off, all right, so we'll go around the room. Supervisor King.
The only thing I wish that this would have done is come up the beginning of the year. I think it is unfair tax. I think we need to work with small businesses, mom and pops, as I said before. You know, it's kind of bad when mom and pops is paying more than these big chain stores, and they're struggling to make it right now. And I think next year, as we just heard, may be worse than what this year was. So I appreciate this board bringing it up for discussion.
Supervisor Demotts.
Thank you. I've been kind of keeping a tally of not just what people outside of my district are saying, but specifically what I'm hearing from the residents of my district. And I've heard about 80%, and this is just feedback from District G, I've heard about 80% feedback to not abolish the merchant's capital tax, and about 20% of the feedback that I've been getting has been to abolish the merchant capital tax. And so I've made a list of some of the reasons that I'm hearing from within my district about, and the reasons that we heard tonight, our speakers were overwhelmingly in support of abolishing the merchant's capital tax, but we had a couple of speakers that were against abolishment, and it's similar to what I'm hearing from the residents of my district. Concerns about fairness and how it's being enforced is something that I'm hearing. Concerns about how we make up for the loss in revenue. Suggestions to, instead of abolishing the merchant's capital tax, to give tax relief, to give us more time to study and answer some of the questions that I'm getting. Something that I've heard several times is relying on the property tax to go up means that we are shifting the burden of the revenue stream to property owners. And that's something that several people have said to me throughout the past several weeks. One of our speakers tonight made a point that I've heard several times as well, that this is not the correct time to do it. The more logical time to do it is during tax time. I'm not making an argument that the merchant's capital tax is the best way to collect this stream of revenue or the most fair or equitable. However, I'm not convinced that this is an honor system or a voluntary tax. It's a legal tax. It's a legally enforceable tax. If people are not paying it correctly, they're making a choice to violate the law. This isn't an honor system. So I'm going to vote no tonight on abolishing the merchant's capital tax outright. However, I would be certainly open to discussion about giving some sort of tax relief, adjusting the merchant's capital tax rate, giving us more time to actually develop a plan about how we make up for the loss in revenue, especially hearing we've got really good revenue news coming in, but some uncertainty in the future. And so we heard tonight from a speaker that I do agree with. We have limited ways to generate revenue as a county, and abolishing one while asking Richmond to give us more doesn't make a lot of logical sense to me. And also abolishing one when we're planning significant investments in our community in the future also doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So if the vote tonight is we're going to abolish this and it's gone, then I will be voting no against it tonight. If we can come to some sort of compromise to reduce, give tax relief while we study. How are we going to make up the revenue? I'm certainly open to that and would certainly be in favor of doing something like that. And that's all that I have at this time.
Thank you. Supervisor Bone.
I think one of the speakers tonight listed out, or several of the speakers listed out the ways that we generate revenue. Angie's going to be able to tell me better, but real estate tax is what, 2/3 of our revenue?
It's a shame Mark left.
I know.
I'll look that up. Hold on just a minute.
It's somewhere between 2/3 and 75%, though.
It's significant.
Yeah. So I am curious about real estate taxes and how much of it's paid by businesses.
I
Do you
don't have
have any
that, but
idea?
I can try to get that. I don't have that.
And then, of course, we all experience our personal property tax, and businesses also have machinery. And then there's all these fees that we have. But real estate, again, is at least 2/3 of our revenue. Here in Montgomery County, we don't have really the choice between B-poll tax and merchants tax because most of the businesses are within the towns. We're unique that way. We have two of the largest towns in Virginia. And that's why when businesses are located within the towns have B-poll taxes, and then they pay merchants tax also from the county, for the county. Some people were talking about replacing the revenue source with growth and the reassessment. I'm just going to put a pin in that. Some people say it's an old tax. Of course it's an old tax. I mean, we understand when it was put in place. Is it inconsistent? Absolutely. But this is where I want to talk to my colleagues up here. We're not being consistent. We're being inconsistent. We're going to relieve the local merchants, businesses, but we're still pursuing Virginia Tech Foundation for revenue. We're still looking for revenue for tobacco tax. It makes sense to do perhaps an overhaul of all of our taxes. Are we being fiscally responsible, removing this tax, or being fiscally irresponsible and not identify what expenses will be cut? Think about it. $1.5 million over the next 10 years is $15 million. By not identifying what expenses that are going to be cut, we're basically kicking the can down the road and asking the staff to identify what to eliminate. I would make this very, I'd like to make a suggestion that the schools aren't asking for any cut whatsoever. If the board here believes that we can do away with $1.5 million, we should take on the whole burden. The schools are not asking to have their budget reduced. In other words, $1.5 million all comes out of the county budget, and the schools keep their budget. I mean, let's identify where those expenses are coming, what expenses are going to go away. I mean, presentation after presentation from the school, there's no room. Has anybody up here heard of any place to $10 million in the next 10 years from the school budget? Because that's basically what we're doing. $10 million? Let me go back. If we're abolishing a $1.5 million revenue source, and typically 2/3 of our budget goes to the schools, then $1 million per year is going to be taken or not available for the schools. Times 10 years, let's just take 10 years, that's $10 million over the next 10 years that the schools will not have to support our students in a growing county. And that's $5 million on the county side. Where's that money? You know, what are we cutting out of our budget that's $5 million over the next 10 years? No, we're not even identifying a single thing, a single expense. Not a single expense has been identified that's going to be cut out. That's fiscally irresponsible. What are we doing? We're going to have a vote tonight. Either it's going to be completely abolished or perhaps Supervisor DeMott's, and I'm all for figuring out the whole big picture. And reducing. And if it proves to be so that we can completely eliminate, then eliminate, okay? But let's not, you know, conveniently say that this tax will be abolished January 1 without identifying any expenses that won't, you know, that aren't going to be taken out, so that the staff has the hard job of solving the issues, which they certainly are not asking for.
Supervisor Bone?
Yes.
63% of the undesignated revenue comes from real estate.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'm not done. I'm not done. So we eliminate $1.5 million per year. We replace it with growth and reassessment. Growth doesn't turn around that fast to produce $1.5 million of extra revenue. Let's see here. I suggest that we not pass this until specific expenses are identified that we're going to get rid of. I suggest that we take it all out of the county budget because the schools clearly have no room to take it out of their budget. I would encourage us to put in a clause, if possible, that says not to exceed for some of the larger businesses that pay most of this tax so that they do get some relief. I would recommend that we actually, if we could, hire an individual to help businesses like retail establishments who pay less than locally owned businesses and actually enforce a more fair tax. So if what's on the table that is going to be voted on tonight is a complete abolishment of this tax, I will vote no. But I would be happy to actually work with my colleagues up here to identify the expenses that will be eliminated in the fiscal year 24 budget now. So, thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Shepherd.
I do believe it's an unfair tax, and I believe if we set our sails on making it fair by enforcement and monitoring it, it would cost more to do that than we would actually get in the taxes. I'm for getting rid of it. I think it's past time, and that's the way I'll be voting. That's all.
Supervisor Fidzikowski.
As I made the motion, I am definitely in favor of getting rid of it completely. I don't think that the businesses that are paying the lion's share of it would appreciate if we just cut your bill in half. I think the appropriate thing is to get rid of it completely. And I do think the money will be made up. Nobody spoke of any businesses coming here because of it. I realize that's a unknown factor, but I think it is a factor. So I think that's possible. And I don't understand why everybody is jumping to, oh, well, they'll have to increase our real estate tax to make up for it. I don't think so. We're growing. We're a growing county. So I think that all of this, and plus the financial picture we were just given, I think we're in good shape. So I say abolish it. And I will vote yes.
Vice Chair Biggs.
Okay, I've been thinking about this a lot, and so I actually wrote down my thoughts yesterday, so some of it I'm just have in front of me, and I just want to share it with everyone. Okay, so you've heard me over the years talk about the future of our county and its growth, and that means we have to plan for the services and the capital needs that our population growth is going to bring, and we also have to plan how we're going to pay for them. And I've mentioned this before, like we have 2 developments right now going on Price's Fork Road, and they're going to impact our services and our schools and all of that. And we all know from studies that residential growth does not pay for the services that are impacted. Study after study has been done on that. So the state of Virginia, who personally I think needs to look at their whole tax thing, gives us limited ways as localities to raise revenue. And I could argue that all of them are regressive, but that's what we have right now. And those are the only things we have. Some of those that have been mentioned, we have the real estate property tax, the personal property tax, machinery and tools, BPOL, and merchants capital. And I think something that needs to be made clear again is the reason that the county cannot do BPOL is because the 2 towns are doing BPOL. And that is the business, professional, and occupancy license tax. Now, in 2021, that brought in $2.7 million to Blacksburg. And this is according to our staff report. And in Christiansburg, it brought $2.8 million in. So meanwhile, the county was collecting the merchant's capital. That was only 1.5. When you look at where the businesses are located, when you look at where the restaurants and the hotels are, they're basically in the towns. And you've heard me say this before. So they get the meals tax and the rooms tax. We're very limited with what taxes that we can bring in. So I don't know anyone that enjoys paying taxes. I think the taxes in Virginia are antiquated. But the different types of taxes that we do have are there to help us to diversify our county's tax base. It's to, quote unquote, to make it more fair and to enable us to provide for the services that our citizens require. So if we do away with the annual $1.5 million the merchant's capital tax brings in, how do we make the deficit up? Hopefully it doesn't affect our bond rating. That's why I brought up that before, because all of that goes into the big picture of your county budgeting. But it is going to affect how we plan for next year's budget. So these are just some points I want to reiterate that came up before. If we use new growth money, which averages about $2 million a year, it will take most of that money to replace the $1.5 million that the merchant's capital tax brings in. So our authority to use new growth monies to meet the future needs and services of our population growth, that would be greatly reduced. We're using new monies to cover a deficit instead of looking at how can those new monies be used to meet future needs. So do we maintain a portion of the real estate property tax to pay for the reduction of the $1.5 million? Is that fair to all citizens? Do we increase the tax rate on another tax to cover the deficit this would cause? That would be real estate, personal property, machinery and tools. Is that a fair way to go? Do we cut the $1.5 million out of county departments, schools, or capital projects to make this work when our needs are growing? We just held an extended work session on October 1st and talked about funding future county capital needs. These needs will need to be planned for and paid for, just as the needs of the operating budget will. Example, EMS. That's going to be a rising cost every year in our county. How will those needs be addressed if new monies are used to cover the loss of $1.5 million every year? All of these questions will need to be addressed in the next fiscal year's budget. I respect our businesses and everything they bring to our county and the issues they have raised about the merchant's capital tax. But when I look at the entire picture facing our county and think about the concerns I have mentioned here, I am confronted with making a decision tonight to completely remove a reoccurring source of revenue from our county's budget without considering any other options of how to address it, how to adjust it, or how $1.5 million will be replaced in our next year's fiscal budget. So given all this, I cannot support tonight eliminating that tax altogether. I would be in favor of working with colleagues, just like Supervisor Bone and Supervisor DeMont said, if we could do something else. So, and I know I'm not making you happy, David, I know, but it's just, when I look at the whole picture, this is what's like inside, like I'm trying to figure out what the best thing to do is. And right now, I just can't support that, but I would support looking at a way to evaluate it and looking at other options. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Biggs. So one of the most important thing I think that this board does is that we invest in Montgomery County. And with that, it's to invest in our businesses, promoting positive economic growth. And if you think about all the departments and agencies that we contribute to, that their job is to attract, retain, and help expand these businesses, why would we not consider eliminating a tax that is unfair in that the county has no way to feasibly, cost-effectively way to enforce it? I think that it's unfair. I think it is, again, unfair when you have small businesses that are paying more than a nationally branded retail store. There has to be something not right there. We keep thinking about how would we replace the $1.5 million. We just had an awesome report that said we exceeded our revenues by $6.5 million. And even though that you might say, well, that's, that we have a lot of unsure things coming up, that we don't have that crystal ball. We average on a growth of $2 to $2.2 million on average. I believe investing in these small businesses is a way to make more business, to make more revenue. As an incentive for them, we need to be just as competitive as our neighboring counties of Pulaski and Roanoke. Just because you're wondering about where you're going to find this $1.5 million, you shouldn't make a tax that's unfair continue to be paid. These companies, businesses have been fighting and been vocal about this for over 25 years. We say we can reduce it. Well, it was reduced from $6.05 to $4.05. I'm sorry, $4.05 to the current rate now, $3.05. So they've waited long enough, over 25 years, People talked about, well, we want to raise the real estate tax. Remember, I tried to lower that. I told you reassessments would probably come in higher. I just believe that we need to be positive to increase economic growth, to help expand, retain. And we've already heard that, what if a company leaves Montgomery County? That's a consideration. Hundreds of job loss. It's not just the inventory tax that you will lose, you'll have a significant impact on Montgomery County when 300 people have lost their job. How do you invest? You do that with economic growth. You give businesses every advantage that they can have to expand, to hire, for employment, and they turn around and that tax revenue helps us provide services for our citizens. So my vote will be to abolish this tax that has been well overdue.
There seemed to be some discussion about like counties that have things and counties that don't. And looking over the information that we were sent, we know we have 95 counties in Virginia. So it looked like to me 79 of the 95 were doing something. 41 had the merchant's capital, but 38 had the B poll. And I think there needs to be, Roanoke County has been referred to. Well, they have B poll. They make almost $7 million off a B poll. And the county can't make money off a B poll because look where the businesses are located. They're located basically in the two towns, and the two towns are making the money on B poll. So I think that's something else to consider when you're looking at the whole picture.
Supervisor King.
You know, as I said, we're not being fair across the board. I was against cigarette tax. I still am. Always have been. And it's also said $1.5 million. Go out and talk to these businesses in Montgomery County. A lot of them don't have the inventory they had last year. They don't have it. So my feeling is, and the ones that I have talked to, it's not going to be $1.5 million this time.
Supervisor Bone.
Angie, in Mark's projections, does he have the merchant's tax included?
We currently will collect it in December of 2022, so it is included in those numbers. But as we move forward into 24, if you take this action tonight, that's the year that it would affect us. So we haven't projected for 24 yet.
So what the reason why the primary reason why what Mark went over today is as positive as it looks is because it's mostly one-time money, which will not happen in subsequent years.
We do expect that to trail off, that's correct.
Significantly.
Yes, significantly. We don't know how far it's going to go. We don't know where it's going to level out.
I actually like what Supervisor Biggs was talking about, how, as well as Supervisor Blevins, if we average 2 to 2.2 more than what Mark projected in any one year, the 1.5 leaves us 0.7, which is pretty scary to me. I don't see where the extra revenue will come from if this is eliminated. The businesses won't be providing it. You're saying that more businesses will come. You're saying that businesses, if we don't do something now, if we don't abolish this now, that businesses will leave. If we adjust what we're doing, and I don't agree with I do not agree with Supervisor Shepherd that if we actually had a monitoring or enforcement piece to this, it's not going to cost $1.5 million to do that. It would cost a person maybe, $100,000 max. And then major retailers might end up paying more, which would then pay for the enforcement. And who knows what else. I think that, and no one's talking about any expenses that will be eliminated. So, thank you.
So you're suggesting that one person is going to go around to 4,000 businesses and check on their inventory?
The Commissioner of the Revenue has an office that they do a lot of things for all the other taxes. I think great strides could be made because there's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. And I would be in great support of reducing if there was a way to cap or not to exceed taxes so that the large employers don't have to, pay as much as they're doing right now.
I would call for the question.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Demotz?
No.
Ms. Bone?
No.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Fitchukowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
No.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
4 ayes, 3 no.
The tax is abolished.
January 1st.
All right. Next up, ordinance amending Chapter 10 entitled Zoning, Section 10-48 and 10-61 mini warehouses. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Fitchukowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Demotz?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Next up, FY23 Capital Fund appropriations.
Motion.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Fitchukowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Demotz?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Next up, National Breast Cancer Awareness Month for October.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. Fitchukowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Demotz?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
As a breast cancer survivor, aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
National Domestic Violence Awareness Month for the month of October.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Demotz?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Fitchukowski?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Reports, County Attorney.
Madam Chair, I have no report, so I'll yield my remaining time to the County Administrator.
Thank you, Marty. County Administrator.
Thank you, County Attorney. I'll try to be judicious with the use of that time. 3 items I wanted to mention, 2 items from last Thursday. The Chamber hosted an Eggs and Issues meeting last Thursday that Chair Blevins and I attended related to passenger rail in the New River Valley. That project is moving full steam ahead, no pun intended, and things are looking good. It was great to hear from the Chief Operating Officer of Virginia Passenger Rail was one of the speakers, and I think in just a few years you're going to be able to get on a train over near the mall and go to D.C. and Philadelphia and Boston and on up the corridor. So we're real excited about that. Also last Thursday, in other transportation news, Bree and her team put together a transportation comp plan open house and it was great to stop by and see all the work that's been done there. That's part of our overall county comprehensive plan, and just with a lot of things that are going on, there's never enough money to deal with the transportation needs, but we're doing our best to prioritize the issues and seek out every penny we can to address those. In a meeting this week on Thursday, the chief administrative officers meet each month, and we're meeting on Thursday with the new Radford University president over in Radford. So look forward to getting to meet him and learn more about the things that are going on and what his vision is for the university and how we can work closely together with them from Montgomery County. And that's all I have.
Supervisor Fidzikowski, report.
No report.
Supervisor King.
I have no report, but I do appreciate everybody coming out spending their evening with us.
Supervisor DeMotts.
I have a few items, and I apologize. One of them might be a little bit time-consuming. I wanted to make all of you aware of an issue that we've been experiencing in my district related to the new polling location G3. And this, I've gotten quite a lot of feedback from residents, and so I want to make sure everybody knows, just in case they hear something from a friend or neighbor or something like that. The G3 polling precinct mailing or postcards that came out to notify voters of the change of address of their polling location came out with the incorrect address. So it had the polling location is at 2300 North Main Street, and the postcard actually said it's at 300 North Main Street. The first citizen that contacted me sent me a picture of his postcard, and I immediately contacted our registrar, Connie Beyer, who is absolutely wonderful. Her response to this was incredible. She let me know that when we redistricted this year, that's what prompted the need for an additional polling location. There was an additional bill passed by the General Assembly that directed the state to do the notifications instead of letting the local registrars do the notifications. I'm sure it was well-intentioned, but it failed in Montgomery County and has ended up costing us some funds and quite a bit of staff time in order to correct it. Connie immediately notified the state when she was made aware. Somebody had made her aware prior to the citizen notifying me. She immediately notified the state and had to, in her office, get all of the postcards reprinted. The Postmaster General spent an entire day hand sorting all of the new notifications to ensure correctness. And then Connie herself watched the loading of the new postcards onto the postman's truck to be redelivered. So it was kind of an extensive process to correct an error that it is my very firm belief if our local registrar would have been enabled by the General Assembly to send out those postcards in the first place, it wouldn't have happened. So I've been getting a ton, I'm sure you guys can imagine, a ton of information back from voters, and they're confused. Connie corrected it very, very quickly. I'm very grateful for her, but if anybody hears anything, that's, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. And so that's all I had on that. I had two other very small things. Most people should have gotten their personal property taxes by now. It's never fun to get a bill, but I really wanted to draw everybody's attention to the Parks and Rec flyers that were included in the bill. It does have a basic calendar that includes registration dates for the youth sports and other activities that Montgomery County offers through our Parks and Rec department. I want to thank our Parks and Rec department for putting those in the bills and the commissioner for allowing them to be put in the bills. So I think that shows a great working relationship between those two different offices to think to put some good news in your bills. And then on that same subject, I want to thank Supervisor Fidzikowski in advance. He will be attending the Parks and Rec meeting this week. I will not be available to attend. I hate to miss it, but he's going to attend in my absence. And I know he will do a wonderful job. Good luck with that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
That's good.
Supervisor Bone.
No report.
Supervisor Shepherd.
No report.
Vice Chair Biggs.
No report, but thanks everyone for coming tonight.
And just a few things, just wanted to congratulations for the fire prevention parade this past week. That was a huge success. And then also wanted to, Miss Vice Chair Biggs and I attended the Farm Bureau's annual dinner, and that was a good event. So congratulations on that. And we both signed their Ag Vision pledge for that. And then just wanted also just to thank all the citizens and businesses that came out tonight to comment. We're always encouraging everyone to be engaged, and that's exactly what we had tonight. I also want to just congratulate those businesses for over 25 years for being vocal and for continuing to that. So we are so glad for you. And with that being said, we are finished.